Commander Doug Fletcher was having one of those days that made him question his career choices. As Earth's diplomatic representative aboard Harmony Point, the galaxy's premier multi-species space station, he'd expected more. Well, Harmony. Commander Fletcher. Commander Fletcher. Lieutenant Creeks, a blue-skinned Meridian with 3 eyes that all currently expressed varying degrees of panic, came skidding around the corner. Emergency in Docking Bay 7. The Vexlar delegation is threatening to leave the station. Doug sighed and set down his coffee mug, which proudly displayed the text "Human fluid, do not drink in 17 languages. What is it this time? Did someone sneeze near them again? No, sir. Much worse. There's some kind of creature. Doug raised an eyebrow. Define creature. Escaped from a damaged containment unit in cargo. Security footage shows it's about half a meter tall, has too many limbs, and appears to be leaking. Leaking what exactly? Unknown viscous substance, sir. The Vexlars are calling it a harbinger of doom. Of course they were. The Vexlars, with their rigid exoskeletons and even more rigid customs, found nearly everything disturbing. Last month, they'd almost declared war over a human child's balloon. When Doug arrived at Docking Bay 7, the scene was pure chaos. Security officers from various species formed a perimeter, weapons drawn. The Vexlar ambassador, Tixnar, was vibrating so rapidly his ceremonial plates were clattering. Commander. Tixnar's translator rendered his clicking speech into a shrill, panicked voice. Remove this abomination immediately, or we depart forever. Doug peered past the security line. In the corner, partially hidden behind a cargo container, was a small, dark shape leaving a glistening trail. He moved closer, ignoring the warnings from security. Commander Fletcher. Please maintain distance, Chief of Security Gorlak bellowed, her 4 arms all clutching different weapons. The creature is unidentified and potentially lethal. But Doug had already gotten close enough for a good look, and contrary to the panicked reactions around him, his first thought was, that's actually kind of adorable. The creature resembled a cross between a cat, an octopus, and a shadow. It had 6 limbs that seemed to shift and change position. Its body was velvety black with patches that seemed to absorb light completely. 2 large, opalescent eyes blinked up at Doug. Yes, it was leaving a trail of something dark and viscous, but it looked more like frightened sweat than anything sinister. When the creature made a small chirping sound, the Vexlar delegation collectively shrieked and retreated further. The death cry. It makes the death cry. Tixnar was now fully hysterical. Doug knelt down. Hey there, little buddy. You lost? Yeah. The creature tilted what appeared to be its head and made the chirping sound again. One of its limbs extended slightly toward Doug. "Ben Fletcher, do not touch it," Gorlak shouted. Too late. Doug had already extended his hand. The creature's limb worn and surprisingly soft wrapped gently around his finger. See? Totally harmless, Doug said, just as every alarm on the station began blaring simultaneously. 3 hours later, Doug was sitting in Station Commander Ortiz's office, being thoroughly dressed down. Let me get this straight, Fletcher. Commander Ortiz pinched the bridge of her nose. You made physical contact with an unknown alien species, directly disobeying security protocols, causing the Vexlar delegation to terminate talks and quarantine themselves for ritual cleansing? In my defense, they overreacted, Doug said, and I'd like to point out that I'm not dead, mutated, or possessed. Pure luck. The creature escaped during the commotion, and we've had to lock down 3 decks. Station zoologists can't even identify its species. I can help look for it, Doug offered, too quickly. Ortiz narrowed her eyes. Why? Professional curiosity. Plus, whatever it is, it seemed scared, not dangerous. Fine. But follow proper protocols this time, and wear a containment suit. Doug had no intention of wearing a containment suit, and even less intention of following protocols. Something about the creature's eyes had struck him: intelligence, fear, and loneliness, all too familiar feelings for someone stationed far from home. But He headed straight to the station's database instead of joining the search teams. If the creature had arrived in a cargo shipment, there would be records. After an hour of searching, Doug found something. A small entry, heavily encrypted, about a specimen being transported from a research outpost near the Nox system. The encryption was military grade, but Doug had picked up a few skills during his misspent youth before joining the diplomatic corps. What he found made his blood run cold. Thanatos Reaper, the entry read. Indigenous to Nox 7, extremely dangerous predator. Class 5 quarantine protocols mandatory. Being transported to Military Research Station Omega for weapons development analysis. The entry included an image that matched the creature he'd encountered, though the database version looked significantly more terrifying, with its limbs splayed aggressively and what appeared to be razor-sharp appendages extended. Well, shit, Doug muttered. His communicator beeped. Commander Fletcher, report to Cargo Bay 3 immediately. Security has cornered the organism. Doug ran, taking shortcuts through maintenance tunnels. He had to get there before they killed it, because despite what the database said, his gut told him something different. And Doug Fletcher's gut had kept him alive through 3 interstellar conflicts and one particularly nasty diplomatic dinner featuring live food. When he arrived, breathless, at Cargo Bay 3, a security team had surrounded something in the corner. Their weapons were drawn and set to maximum. Wait. Doug called out, pushing through the security line. The commander, stand back. Lieutenant Crix warned. We've identified the creature. It's a Thanatos Reaper, one of the deadliest predators in the known galaxy. Just give me a minute with it. Doug insisted. Absolutely not. It kills by. But Doug had already slipped past. In the corner, trembling and making itself as small as possible, was the creature. Its opalescent eyes seemed bigger now, filled with what Doug could only interpret as terror. Hey there, Doug said softly, crouching down. Remember me? The creature made a soft trilling sound and cautiously extended a limb. The commander, do not touch it. That's how it begins the neural paralysis before feeding, Crix shouted. Doug ignored him and reached out. The creature's limb gently wrapped around his finger again, and once more nothing horrible happened. See? We're cool. Doug scooped the creature up. It was surprisingly light and immediately curled against his chest, the way a cat might. Its body was impossibly soft and seemed to vibrate slightly. I'm naming you Squish, Doug decided on the spot. The security team looked on in horror as Doug cradled what they believed to be a vicious killing machine. Their weapons remained drawn, but confusion had replaced determination. Commander Fletcher, Crix said slowly, every record indicates that creature should have liquefied your brain by now. Doug scratched what he assumed was Squish's head. Well, that's clearly incorrect information. And as the diplomatic representative from Earth, I'm formally requesting custody of this clearly harmless being while we sort this out. The Commander Ortiz will never. Interspecies law grants me the right to request an independent assessment before any sentient being is harmed, Doug quoted smoothly. I'm invoking that now. It was a bluff. Doug had no idea if Squish was sentient, though those eyes certainly suggested intelligence. But it bought him time to figure out what was really going on with his new friend, who was now making a sound suspiciously like purring. Absolutely not. Commander Ortiz slammed her hand on her desk. That thing is going into high security containment until we can transfer it to the proper authorities. Doug stood his ground, Squish still nestled comfortably in his arms. With all due respect, Commander, I believe there's been a misunderstanding about this species. Squish hasn't shown any aggressive behavior. Squish? You named it. Ortiz looked like she might spontaneously combust. Fletcher, the Vexlar delegation has already filed 17 formal complaints. The Meridian Embassy is threatening to evacuate, and military intelligence is demanding we hand over the specimen immediately. That's the point, isn't it? Doug said, his voice hardening. Someone wants this specimen badly enough to classify it as something it's not. What exactly are you implying? I'm saying there's more going on here than a scary-looking space pet. Why is a supposedly deadly predator acting like an abandoned kitten? Why was it in a civilian cargo shipment labeled as research equipment? Ortiz's eyes narrowed. 24 hours, Fletcher. I'm giving you 24 hours to prove your theory. Until then, that creature stays in containment. No deal. Squish stays with me. That's not negotiable. Actually, it is. Doug pulled up a regulation on his datapad. Harmony Treaty, Section 7, Paragraph 12, in cases of disputed classification of potentially sentient lifeforms, diplomatic representatives may request temporary guardianship pending formal assessment. Ortiz read the regulation and cursed. 24 hours. But if that thing so much as hiccups wrong, I'm spacing both of you, and you're personally responsible for containing it. Fair enough. As Doug left Ortiz's office, Squish nestled closer, its body temperature rising slightly. The creature seemed to understand it had found an ally. Doug's quarters were modest standard diplomatic accommodations with a small living area, bedroom, and office space. He decorated minimally, with a few holo photos from Earth and a collection of strange artifacts picked up during his travels. Home sweet home, Squish, he said, setting the creature down on his coffee table. Squish looked around curiously, extending and retracting its limbs as it explored. The way it moved was mesmerizing, sometimes flowing like liquid, other times making precise, deliberate movements. Doug's communicator chimed. Fletcher, the Vexlar ambassador is threatening to destroy the station rather than remain in proximity to the Thanatos Reaper. Get to conference room Alpha immediately. On my way. Doug looked at Squish. Stay here, okay? Don't touch anything. Squish made a chirping sound that Doug chose to interpret as agreement. Then. You also were. The meeting was exactly as pleasant as Doug expected, which is to say, not at all. Ambassador Tixnar had brought his entire entourage, all vibrating with fear or anger or both. 3 other species representatives were present, along with Commander Ortiz and several security officers. This is an outrage. Tixnar's plates clattered so loudly it nearly drowned out his translator. Harboring a Thanatos Reaper violates 17 interstellar treaties. Ambassador, Doug said calmly, I believe there's been a misidentification. The creature shows none of the aggressive behaviors associated with. It is toying with you. Tixnar interrupted. The Reaper consumed 3 Vexlar colonies during the Great Expansion. They liquefy their prey from the inside while keeping the nervous system intact so victims feel everything. Doug frowned. That sounds biologically improbable. Your ignorance does not invalidate our historical trauma. Earth must recall you immediately for this transgression. The meeting deteriorated from there. For 2 hours, Doug defended his position while learning more about why Squish's species was so feared. According to galactic records, Thanatos Reapers were apex predators that hunted in packs, could survive in vacuum, and had adaptive biology that made them nearly impossible to kill. Yet none of that matched the gentle creature now waiting in his quarters. When Doug finally returned, he half expected to find his living space destroyed. Instead, he found Squish curled up on his pillow, sound asleep. The creature had somehow managed to arrange Doug's collection of strange artifacts in a perfect geometric pattern on the floor. You've been busy, Doug remarked. Squish opened its eyes and made a happy chirping sound. One limb stretched toward Doug, and he realized with a start that the creature was inviting him closer. You're not what they say you are you? Doug sat on the bed and gently stroked Squish's velvety surface. So what are you, really? As if in answer, Squish's body shifted, revealing a small pattern of bioluminescent dots underneath. They pulsed in a sequence that seemed almost communicative. Doug's eyes widened. Oh, you're trying to talk to me. Doug didn't sleep that night. Instead, he spent hours watching Squish's bioluminescent patterns, recording them, and trying to establish some basic communication. By morning, he'd figured out that different pulses represented different needs or emotions. 3 quick flashes meant Squish was hungry. A slow wave pattern seemed to express contentment. This changes everything, Doug muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. You're fully sentient. Squish chirped and extended a limb to touch Doug's face, leaving a small smear of the mysterious vis substance. To Doug's surprise, the spot tingled pleasantly before warmth spread through his cheek. A small cut he'd gotten during yesterday's chaos sealed itself instantly. Did you just heal me? Squish's lights pulsed in what Doug now recognized as an affirmative pattern. The substance you secrete is not toxic, it's medicinal. This was a revelation. What if everything known about Thanatos Reapers was wrong? Or worse, what if it had been deliberately misrepresented? Doug's door chimed. Security check, Commander Fletcher. Doug quickly picked up Squish and placed him in the bathroom. Stay quiet, he whispered before closing the door. Lieutenant Crix entered, looking around suspiciously. Just verifying the creature is still contained and you're still alive. As you can see, I'm fine. Squish is harmless. Squish, Crix repeated with disgust. The commander. 3 separate delegations have threatened to abandon the station. Military intelligence has dispatched a special containment unit that will arrive in 18 hours. This situation has escalated beyond your authority. I understand the concern, but I'm making progress in understanding the species. I believe they've been fundamentally mischaracterized. Crix looked unconvinced but completed his inspection and left. The moment the door closed, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency in Medical Bay C. All available personnel report immediately. Doug's communicator lit up with Commander Ortiz's face. Fletcher. Get down here now and bring your pet. We have a situation that might require its particular talents. What do you mean? Just hurry. In Medical Bay C, Doug found chaos. A maintenance worker lay on a biobed, his body convulsing as medical staff tried desperately to stabilize him. A plasma conduit rupture, Ortiz explained grimly. The coolant is toxic and we don't have the antidote. He has maybe 20 minutes. And you want Squish to help? Doug was confused. Lieutenant Crix mentioned the creature secreted some kind of substance. Our scans detected powerful regenerative properties. It's worth a try. Doug looked at Squish, who was watching the dying man with apparent concern. What do you think, buddy? Can you help him? To everyone's shock, Squish immediately flowed out of Doug's arms and onto the biobed. Before anyone could react, the creature had extended all its limbs, enveloping the injured worker in a gentle embrace. The man's convulsions stopped almost instantly. For 5 tense minutes, Squish remained wrapped around the worker, its body pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. Then, slowly, it unwrapped itself and returned to Doug. The medical staff rushed forward with scanners. This is impossible, the chief medical officer said, checking readings. The toxin is completely neutralized. His damaged tissues are regenerating at an extraordinary rate. The worker opened his eyes, confused but very much alive. Commander Ortiz stared at Squish, then at Doug. I want a full report. Now. Over the next few hours, as the worker made a miraculous recovery, Doug explained his findings. Squish wasn't a predator, it was a healer. The deadly secretions were actually powerful regenerative compounds. The neural paralysis was a temporary analgesic effect to prevent pain during healing. If what you're saying is true, why is this species so feared? Ortiz asked. I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. That evening, Doug began secretly taking Squish with him on his diplomatic duties, hidden in a specially modified pouch. The creature seemed to enjoy these outings, particularly diplomatic meetings where tensions ran high. During one particularly heated negotiation between 2 minor species over mining rights, Doug noticed something strange. As the representatives became angrier, Squish became more agitated. Then, when Doug touched the creature reassuringly, he suddenly felt a wave of empathy for both negotiating parties understanding their positions with unexpected clarity. I think I might have a solution, Doug had said, proposing a compromise that amazingly satisfied both parties. Later, back in his quarters, Doug looked at Squish with new understanding. You're empaths, aren't you? You don't just heal physical wounds, you sense and affect emotions too. Squish's lights pulsed in confirmation. And that's why you're feared. Because you can influence emotional states. Someone weaponized your species, didn't they? The lights dimmed sadly. 2 days later, Doug was summoned to an emergency command meeting. The military intelligence containment unit was 6 hours out, and Commander Ortiz had convened senior staff to discuss the handover. I've prepared a formal report documenting Squish's healing abilities, Doug said firmly. I'm submitting a petition for protective status under the Sentient Species Conservation Act. Denied, said a new voice. A tall, severe-looking woman in a black uniform strode into the room. Colonel Vance, military intelligence. That creature is classified as strategic biological material and will be remanded to our custody immediately. Strategic biological material? Doug stood up angrily. Squish is a sentient being with advanced healing abilities. Commander Fletcher, you've been compromised. Thanatos Reapers have telepathic abilities that create positive emotional bonds with host organisms. It's using you. That's ridiculous. If anything, I'm using him. Squish helped save a man's life. Colonel Vance's expression hardened. Kent, that demonstration is precisely why we need the specimen. Its biological compounds could revolutionize military medicine. Dead? So that's it? You want to dissect him for medical compounds? Your attachment is noted, Commander, but irrelevant. Security will collect the creature from your quarters immediately. Chend, so. Doug's blood ran cold. Squish wasn't in his quarters, he was currently nestled in the hidden pouch inside Doug's uniform jacket. Before he could respond, the station rocked violently. Lights flickered and alarms blared. What was that? Ortiz demanded, rushing to a console. Multiple explosions in the primary power core, an officer reported. We're detecting unauthorized shuttles docking at emergency access points. We're being boarded, Crick said, drawing his weapon. Colonel Vance's communicator beeped. She checked it, her expression darkening. This isn't a coincidence. We've tracked a terrorist group targeting our research. They must have learned about the Thanatos Reaper. Another explosion rocked the station. Life support is failing in sections 12 through 16. An officer reported. Hull breach in Cargo Bay 8. Evacuate all civilians to emergency shelters, Ortiz ordered. Security teams to all breach points. Doug felt movement against his chest. Squish was agitated, pulsing rapidly inside the pouch. I need to get back to my quarters, Doug said, starting for the door. Fletcher, we need all hands for emergency response, Ortiz called after him. But Doug was already running, not to his quarters, but toward the nearest breach point. He had a theory about what was happening, and if he was right, Squish might be their only hope. Near Cargo Bay 8, Doug encountered the intruders' humanoid figures in environmental suits with unidentifiable insignia. They were planting additional explosive devices. Hey! Doug shouted, ducking behind a support beam as they opened fire. He was outgunned and outmanned, but he had one advantage they didn't know about. Doug opened the pouch. Squish, I think we need your special talents right about now. Squish looked up at him, lights pulsing rapidly. I know, buddy. It's dangerous. But a lot of innocent people will die if these guys succeed. To Doug's surprise, Squish seemed to nod. Then the creature flowed out of the pouch and onto the floor. What happened next defied everything Doug thought he knew about his small friend. Squish's body expanded, growing to twice, then 3 times its original size. Its normally soft limbs extended into whip-like appendages that glowed with bioluminescence. The attackers noticed too late. Squish moved with incredible speed, wrapping limbs around 2 of them simultaneously. They struggled briefly, then went completely still. Not dead, Doug could see them breathing, just calm. Pacified. The 3rd attacker turned his weapon on Squish, but Doug tackled him from behind. They struggled briefly before Squish extended a limb and touched the attacker's exposed neck. The man instantly relaxed into unconsciousness. That was impressive. Doug said, as Squish returned to normal size. Security forces arrived moments later, finding Doug standing over 3 unconscious attackers and a small, innocent-looking Squish at his feet. "What happened here?" Lieutenant Crix demanded. "They surrendered," Doug said simply. Over the next hour, the station's security forces, with Squish's clandestine help, neutralized the remaining attackers. No lives were lost, thanks largely to the creature's ability to pacify rather than harm. When Colonel Vance finally cornered Doug in a corridor, she had 4 armed soldiers with her. Hand over the specimen. "Commander." "That's an order." Doug stood his ground, Squish now perched proudly on his shoulder. "I don't think so, Colonel. Squish just saved this entire station while your team was still prepping their weapons." The creature's combat capabilities only confirm its status as a military asset. "Funny, I didn't see any combat. I saw non-lethal peacekeeping. Squish could have killed those attackers, but he chose not to. That's the difference between a weapon and a sentient being with morals." Commander Ortiz rounded the corner, looking between Doug and the Colonel. "Stand down, Colonel. I've just received new orders from Starfleet Command. The incident has been classified Level 1 priority, and all after-action decisions are now under station jurisdiction." Colonel Vance looked furious, but had no choice. "This isn't over, Fletcher." "Actually," Doug said, scratching Squish's head, "I think it's just beginning." 1 month later, Harmony Point hosted an unprecedented ceremony. Representatives from 12 species gathered in the main atrium, including surprisingly a small Vexlar delegation. Commander Ortiz stood at the podium, with Doug and Squish beside her. "Today marks a historic occasion," she announced. "For the first time in Harmony Point's history, we formally recognize a new sentient species and welcome its first ambassador." Squish, now wearing a small but dignified diplomatic collar with translation technology, pulsed happily. "Following extensive testing and communication development, we now understand that the species formerly misclassified as Thanatos Reapers are actually empathic healers from Nox 7, with their natural abilities healing, emotional regulation, and non-violent conflict resolution were weaponized during the sector wars by multiple military factions. The fear surrounding them was deliberately cultivated to maintain their status as controlled assets." Doug stepped forward. "Thanks to the courage of this individual, whom I call Squish, but whose proper name translates roughly to Harmony Bringer, we've established first legitimate contact with a species that seeks only peaceful coexistence." The newly developed translator converted Squish's light pulses into audible language my people have hidden for generations, feared for abilities meant to heal and unite. Through Commander Fletcher's kindness, I have found hope that our true nature can be understood. The ceremony continued with formal recognition of Squish as both a sentient being with full rights and as the first ambassador of the newly named Harmonics. Later, back in Doug's quarters, now officially shared diplomatic accommodations, Squish settled onto the bed that Doug had long since ceded to his friend. "You know," Doug said, settling into the somewhat less comfortable pull-out couch, "you have your own diplomatic quarters now. And fancy ones too." Squish pulsed gently, the translator on his collar activating. "I prefer this arrangement. Your sleeping patterns amuse me, and your dreams taste interesting." Doug sat up. "My dreams what?" A figure of speech, Squish's lights pulsed in what Doug now recognized as the harmonic equivalent of laughter. "Mostly. You know, most humans would be freaked out living with a mind-reading alien. Most aliens would be freaked out living with a human who snores like a dying cargo lifter." Doug threw a pillow at Squish, who caught it effortlessly with 3 limbs. "Admit it," Doug said, grinning. "Of all the species you could have bonded with, you lucked out getting a human. We're the only ones crazy enough to look at something everyone else fears and think, hey, that's kind of cute." Squish's lights pulsed in agreement. "Humans are unusual that way. It's why we've watched your species for so long. Where others see danger, you often see possibility. Is that a compliment or an insult?" "Both, obviously." Squish settled deeper into the pillows. "Now be quiet. Tomorrow we have 17 diplomatic meetings, and one of us needs to actually be competent." Doug laughed and turned off the lights. In the darkness, Squish's gentle bioluminescence created patterns across the ceiling, patterns that Doug now recognized as stories, histories of a species long misunderstood, but finally finding its place in the galaxy. All because one human thought a nightmare beast was kind of cute.